So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the November board meeting. Very nice to see everybody. And also hello to everybody who is online, who's observing online, and we welcome various members both online and actually Sam in person from the DHSC, so you're very welcome. We have apologies from Christine Watson, who's just become a grandmother again of twins, so that's a good reason not to be here. I think she's probably working harder there than she would be here. And as usual, in the interest of transparency, the proceedings of this meeting will be recorded. And as always, let me just invite declarations of interest. So going around the table, Geeta.
Thank you. I was appointed as a member of the International Advisory Board for Lancet Obstetrics, Gynecology and Women's Health.
Tim.
Thank you. I do consultancy work for a company in the Gulf.
Anya.
Freelance work within the fertility sector.
And Steve.
Thank you. Excuse me. Yes, I provide the consultancy advice to various aspects of the fertility sector.
Thank you very much. So the first item on the agenda, as is always, is the previous minutes of the meeting in September. Last September, and any matters arriving. They were a complicated set of minutes, particularly reflecting the embryo testing discussion. And I'm grateful to Ali, who did a great job on the minutes, but also to members who raised comments and amendments and additions. So they've been through everybody a couple of times now. So let me just ask, are there any further comments or amendments to these minutes before we approve them? No? Okay, great. Thank you very much. The minutes are approved. And basically, matters arising are there are two areas, both of which are will be raised in one way or another during the meeting. So I don't think we need to trouble ourselves at the moment. So the next item on the agenda is, as always, is the Chair and CEO's report. So I think starting with me. So I attended two actually very interesting events since our last meeting. Firstly, in September, I went to Cambridge to attend the 100th birthday celebrations of Bob Edwards, who was one of the IVF pioneers. And helped deliver sort of in wider sense of the world, Louise Brown. And it was very interesting to both hear about the history in the past, the members of Bob Edwards' family with that, but also to hear some of the work that is being done in the future with, for example, stem cell derived gametes and so on. So it was a very well attended conference, and always fun to go to Cambridge, and always fun to hear what people are doing. And the other thing is, a couple of weeks ago, I went to a workshop at the Nuffield Council on Bioethics. Basically, the theme of it was how regulatory frameworks need to change to be more agile, to be able to regulate responsibly fast emerging technologies. And there were three initial speakers who gave what they call provocations. I was one of them. I was asked to be only 5 minutes and to be provocative. So that was something of a challenge. I hope I managed to do both. But, you know, one of the themes that I said was, you know, in order to be an agile regulator, you need some flexibility in the way you regulate. And for us, law reform was really going to be a key plank of that. It didn't stop us regulating in an agile way, but it made it much more difficult that we didn't have the regulatory or the legal tools. So anyway, it was a good discussion and a good afternoon. The only other thing that I just wanted to mention more broadly is that I'm delighted that yesterday members met and we had a session which was a board effectiveness review. We do a proper board effectiveness review every year. Every 3 years, and that will be another 2 years' time, we will ask an independent person to do that. It's generally civil service likes to do it that way, and I think it's very appropriate. This year, I facilitated the review. We sent members a questionnaire in advance, and we also asked members of the SMT to fill that in about how we felt the board was going. I mean, I'm obviously not complacent at all, but pleased that generally speaking, I think we all felt that we were working well together as a board, and we were delivering value to the organisation. But as always, and I think very positively, we were quite robust about highlighting some of the areas where we could do better, or we might need to rethink how we approach things, just to make sure that we had all the information and the tools necessary and the time necessary to carry out our sort of functions. So I thought that was very positive. And as a follow-up, Peter and I are going to produce something for members to look at, which will, you know, highlight some of the discussion and make some recommendations. But I think it is very, very important for us, for arm's length bodies generally, but I'm really looking at our body to make sure that the board continues to be the best it possibly can, and doing these effectiveness reviews once a year, and we do a light touch review at the 6-month point to make sure that we're actually doing what we said we were going to do when we had this meeting now. And I think that's very positive, and I'd like to thank members for being, you know, really very engaged in it and helping us to get what I think was a very good result. So that's it for me. Peter.
Thanks, Julia. I can be brief. As you see, there's not much I need to publicly report at this stage. We had our usual quarterly accountability meeting with the department, and I'm pleased to report that's a very positive. I think the department very much of the view that we're, you know, meeting all of our business plan requirements. The other thing probably worth saying, in late October, there was, I think, again, this is quarterly, I attended a meeting of the Health and Social Care Regulators Forum. So this brings together all of the sort of statutory arm's length bodies and the professional regulatory bodies, and tries to identify, if you like, common issues. And that may include, for example, the sort of thing that Julie's just referred to in terms of the extent to which our collective regulatory frameworks can adapt to new developments. It may look at HR issues and the like. I don't think there's anything I need to report to the board at this particular meeting, but I think it's worth noting that it's part of a wider set of efforts in which health regulators in the widest sense are trying both to not just work together better, but I think actually consider these common issues in a way that hopefully we can arrive at better solutions for all of us. But I'm happy to take any questions on that. But more than that, I think that's all I need to mention at this stage.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions for Peter or excuse me. Thank you. Okay, so now we move on to the committee chair's report, and actually this session we've had in the last few months we had a full suite actually, so we've got reports from all 4 committee chairs. So let's start with Statutory Approvals Committee, and Frances, I think, is going to give us an update.
Thank you. Yes, the Statutory Approvals Committee continues.
Francis, you're
That all right?
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. The Statutory Approvals Committee continues to meet monthly, and as you will see from the minutes, whereas a year or two ago we were typically reviewing 2 or 3 Mendelian disorders, it's now not unusual for us to have 7 or 8 to consider. And the sorts of conditions that we're considering are mostly becoming much, much rarer, such that the peer reviewer and the external genetics expert we have who attends the committee meetings may not have actually seen these rare conditions themselves, and therefore have to do more background work researching what the implications are and what the clinical effects of those diagnoses will be. In your paperwork, it says the minutes of the October meeting have not yet been approved, but they have now been approved and will be available on the website shortly if they're not there already. You'll recall that back in the summer, I think it was in July, there was the long-awaited publication from Newcastle about the successful birth of a number of children following mitochondrial replacement therapy. And unsurprisingly, having been quiet for a number of months, we're now starting to see applications come back in from other couples seeking to have mitochondrial replacement. As you may know, that is licensed on a couple by couple basis rather than licensed by the disease. So every individual couple who requests that treatment in Newcastle has to have a license specifically for their own treatment. And then the final responsibility of our committee is about providing special directions for the import or export of eggs, sperm and embryos. And we usually have a couple of those each month. Sometimes initially the information that we're given is not sufficient for us to be able to make a decision, in which case we have to go back to the centre in this country that has made the request, and they may well then have to liaise with the centre abroad in order to obtain the extra information that we've asked for before coming back to us seeking approval. Take any questions.
Francis, I just do actually have one question because, as everybody knows, SAC meets once a month, so it's really the most heavy-duty committee. And we did some time ago, quite successfully actually, have a sort of buddy system where people were sort of in pairs, so that you had to come to sort of at least 6 a year, even if you couldn't manage the full 12, because it's a very big ask, particularly since it's become more complicated. Given that you are now seeing a rise in applications and they are becoming more complicated and so on, do you have enough members on the committee? Are you supported enough? You know, because do we have enough experts? Because it's you know, it's quite a big ask, this committee.
So the committee is, as far as I believe I'm correct in saying, meeting the requirements, the KPI in terms of turnaround time and so on. We haven't yet had a committee meeting that's overrun the number of hours scheduled for it. And I think that's because the preparation by the committee, the in-house committee here in-house, the people who prepare all the papers for us, and the reviews we get from the external peer reviewers and from Genetic Alliance on behalf of patients affected by that condition are always extremely good. When peer reviewers are asked to look at a particular condition, an application having been made for that condition, usually on behalf of a particular couple, one of the questions they're asked is this condition part of a group of conditions that it would make sense for the committee also to consider at the same time? And it may be that there are 1 or 2 more. It may be that there are 10 or 20 more. And I think one of the things we have done is shifted the dial slightly and said, well, look, unless this condition is phenotypically, clinically, really exactly the same, then it is not appropriate for us to consider it. Because we need, if it's different, we need a lot of separate additional information in order to make that decision. And actually, if there isn't an application on behalf of a couple for that condition to be licensed, we don't need to do that. That doesn't mean to say we have rejected a license for that condition. We've just said, look, we don't need to spend time considering that condition now because we don't have a couple that has applied for it. And I think that has just given us a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we use our time. The other thing which I mentioned at our last meeting, but which is now underway, is this plan to review all the 1900 odd conditions that are licensed in order to find out, has treatment changed so significantly that it is no longer appropriate for them to be on the list. And they've all been categorized into different types of diseases. We've identified quite a large group of external reviewers to advise us whether treatment has changed significantly. A paperwork has either just gone out or is imminently about to go out to them, and they have a small number of weeks in order to turn that round. I think it's unlikely that much will come off the list, but that's a sort of once every 5 or 6 years task, which isn't particularly involving other members of the committee, although they'll see the final report when it comes back, but is additional work for the people here who are having to organise all that exercise.
Thank you. Anya.
It was just very briefly to back up what Francis is saying about the paperwork. As definitely a layperson to the world of science, I've found the Genetic Alliance reports and all the paperwork really reassuring and really helpful. And so I just think that's quite a useful thing for the wider public to know as well, that the level of really comprehensive but very understandable information that we're receiving within the committees is really, really reassuring. Claire.
Just to come back to the points about workload. So you can see if you look in the performance report that there was at one point a sort of increasing number of applications to SAC. I think it's too early to say whether this is a trend or that was a blip. Certainly, I can report that towards the end of this year, they're much more the usual sorts of numbers we've seen. But in looking at this, I know it's something members have been concerned about in terms of the workload of SAC and how busy it is and whether it's manageable. Caroline, now relatively new head of licensing, although she's been here nearly a year, will be bringing a kind of report, if you like, to the March Authority meeting, which is the meeting where you will look at the various committee effectiveness reviews from each of the committees to kind of summarise, what we're seeing in terms of applications to SAC and, potential ideas may or may not want us to look into how things might be done differently if it's felt the workload is kind of becoming overburdensome for members.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, so I just wanted to, so I'm a member of SAC, and I just wanted to, thank Francis obviously for that very helpful summary, and indeed to reiterate, as Anya has noted, the value of the Genetic Alliance statements to our work, and that is the patient perspective and information from patients about their experience of conditions being really important to the way we make our decisions, absolutely. And indeed noted, Francis, the important review about treatment potentially have things changed. And the other thing just to note about, as you said, Francis, in terms of SAC's work, that because the question of the detail of the information is so important, as you say, sometimes we're deferring decisions, but we're not rejecting them, and we're making it as clear as we can in the minutes. Something isn't necessarily rejected, but rather more information is sought, and it's an important distinction that's received in the right way on the other end, that it would be very clear if something is rejected, but we have had a couple of instances recently where we've actually just sought additional information, and that's just reiterating that point. Yeah, thank you.
Peter.
Thank you. Just to reassure you, Chair, because you're worried about the workload. First of all, I'd like to say excellent chairmanship from Frances. She really manages very efficiently and very effectively, and she gives us time back because it's run so well and so smoothly. Just really thank her for that. But I echo my colleagues' comments about excellent preparatory work by the team behind the scenes and given to us, and the Genetic Alliance report, peer reviewers report, and external advisors just makes it quite easy for all of us to go through such complex cases and situations. So just to reassure you on that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So moving on to a Licence Committee, where Alison McTavish is going to give the overview.
Graham's going to give the overview. Oh, sorry.
Yes, I thought you decided something because it said on my thing, Alison, but I thought it might be Graham.
Alison did chair the last meeting, and she's more than welcome to comment on that. It just had one item on the agenda. I don't really have much to report from Licence Committee because the September meeting was reported on last time prior to the minutes being approved. And I'm grateful for the comment then about PRs being followed up so efficiently. I think we've been talking about committee structure. It is just worth reflecting on the way in which the minutes are produced for Licence Committee. It's not even unique in this organisation, but it's different to what I've experienced in relation to the committees of other boards I've been on, in the sense that I pay tribute to the Secretariat, not just for the preparation of papers, but for the preparation of minutes, which are then, of course, sent to every member of the committee for amendment or correction, as well as the chair. And once we've all agreed, they then go to the legal advisor, who makes whatever comments he or she wishes, and then comes back to me for final sign-off. So it does seem sometimes quite a lengthy period between the meeting and the approval and publishing of the minutes. But I do think that is illustrative of the care that's taken over all of our paperwork, and I just thought it's worth commenting on that at a public meeting. I don't know whether Alison, you want to add anything from the last meeting, which I gather was very efficiently chaired.
Thank you for that, Graham. We did have one item, and the minutes should be out within the next 10 days or so. At the meeting, we did discuss that the people that are on the Licence Committee should really be involved in an inspection as part of their induction and orientation. And we've still to have a few people through that process. But we did raise it, and Sharon has moved up her list. Well, not really, but she has moved up her list, so that the people that are on the committee at least know how an inspection works. Otherwise, it's running very well. Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you. Just following up on Alison's point there, I'd like to thank Sharon for arranging for me to go and observe an inspection in its entirety. I spent the whole day at a renewal inspection at a clinic, and it was extremely useful. It allowed me to understand how the inspectors get to the inspection that we see at Licence Committee and how they make their recommendations. Yeah, I'm fully supportive of everybody on the Licence Committee being able to do that, accepting that it is another HFEA member during the inspections. So yeah, it was good.
Great.
Just a very brief follow-up to all those comments. Sharon, of course, for any new member of Licence Committee, has explained in detail how the inspection process is undertaken, with especially the desk-based review to begin with, and then just to say, of course, we have had a very thorough explanation, but of course, many of us would also like to attend in person. Yeah, thank you.
One of the, just following up on that, one of the recommendations of the board effectiveness review was obviously I have spent quite a bit of time visiting clinics, and other members have, but not all members have been to a clinic, and certainly these should be more regular. And one of the recommendations we've done, which I will follow up, is probably from the start of 2026 new year, we'll arrange for a programme of clinic visits so that everybody gets at least one next year, because I think it's really helpful, and I intend to start again visiting the clinics I haven't visited for a while as well. So I think that'll be helpful. Tim, on SCAC, please.
Julia, so SCAC, or the Scientific and Clinical Advances Advisory Committee, met in October. and we welcomed Professor Laura Shallcross as a new external advisor. Laura brings expertise in public health and translational data science, so certainly even that first meeting was really adding a lot from her perspective. Following the June recommendations from the June meeting, the HFEA website's been updated to highlight the MHRA guidance on GLP medicines, such as Wegovy and those things like that, when trying to conceive. At the October meeting, we had a wide-ranging discussions, including, as Francis has already touched on, we discussed at SCAC the 2 papers published by Newcastle on mitochondrial donation, which SCAC has been heavily involved in the licensing of that process for many years. We discussed a paper on IVF outcomes in same-sex female couples using partner versus own eggs, and also the recent media attention on developing human eggs from skin cells. We then went on to discuss alternative methods to derive embryonic and embryonic-like skin cells. Then we went on to discuss testicular tissue transplantation to restore fertility in males. And in particular, we discussed the preclinical research, which has been ongoing. And worldwide, there's only been one attempt at this yet, and data is awaited from that. And the reason that this isn't just of theoretical interest, but there are many men who had testicular tissue frozen, usually pre-cancer treatment, when pre-pubertal boys, and these are now coming back and asking for the potential for this tissue to be transplanted back into them. So this is of pressing interest. And we noted that there's a joint statement between the HFEA and the Human Tissue Authority to clarify the regulatory roles between free storage of this tissue and transplantation. And then pretty much finally, from the add-ons perspective, we had a very in-depth review of platelet-rich plasma, which is PRP, which is used already in some clinics in the UK. It was actually proposed as an add-on by Veronique, who's one of the SCAC members. Just for the process, we initially went through before this meeting and looked to see which patient groups were we interested in, what outcomes were we interested in. The executive then did an incredible job of a very wide-ranging literature research. And then the external statistician then went through and did the stats for it. And we then made the decision at SCAC. And I mean, basically, it's quite a short story, this one. We rated everything red. So for the use of PRP, whether you're injecting it into the ovaries, supposedly to improve ovarian response, or whether you're injecting it into the uterus, supposedly to improve endometrial uterine lining, we felt there's a lack of data, which straight away would make it possibly grey, but because of the safety concerns of injecting this stuff into people, then that tipped it into red, which is why it was red. And that is being added to the add-ons page as we speak. And then finally, we discussed the recruitment of some more expert biostatisticians, because we've been very dependent on just one person, and that's a big workload. And I'm pleased to say, actually, since the October meeting, we have actually appointed 3 statisticians to join our pool that we can then lean on for this. So thank you very much.
Any questions for Tim? Gita.
It's not a question, just once again a comment, just to say that there was a great discussion for those of us who were there. Really thorough discussion on everything, which Tim mentioned, brilliantly chaired, by the way. And also for the new one that we discussed as well, there was a lot of discussion before coming to the decision, or suggestion is what I should say, about the add-on. So it's quite good. Thank you.
I've actually got one. I hope it's not a silly question, but it occurs to me when you said, this was brought to SCAC's attention by Veronique, I know that, but how do we actually find out about where something might be an add-on, or decide it is an add-on, or what's that process? I'm not sure. I should probably know, but I don't think I do actually.
So the process, and this was set up before our time actually on SCAC and with the authority, was that there's a definition of what an add-on is, but for an add-on to be added to the add-on list, it needs to be proposed by someone, and that could be a patient, it could be a clinic, it could be a commercial company, it could be a member of the authority, but someone has to propose that they would like this to be considered. What we then do is which is what we did for PRP, we then look to see if it doesn't meet the criteria for an add-on. One of those criteria would be, is it being used or potentially going to be used? If there's something that's being used in a far-flung country and there was no intention of using it here, then we wouldn't be looking at that as an add-on. Interestingly, there had also been a proposal to look at sperm DNA fragmentation testing and the microbiome, which didn't previously fit our criteria to be an add-on. So you might remember we discussed it at a previous authority meeting whether to look at the definition of an add-on to widen it perhaps than was initially intended. And so work is now ongoing at assessing DNA fragmentation and microbiome to add to the add-on list.
Sorry, just to add, if anyone's interested, on the public website on our add-ons page, there's a link at the bottom to the information that Tim just outlined with the kind of whole process and the information, and exactly the same information is on the clinic portal, the clinic-facing part of our website. So for anyone who's interested, that's easily accessible.
I'm sure I saw it at some point in the past, but for some reason it had escaped my mind. But that's very helpful because it's quite good to remind us that sometimes, these things, how these things work, because we don't very often get an add-on added to the list. So when it does, it's a bit different. So Catherine Seddon is chair of AGC. She's been delayed. So Alex, who's deputy chair, is going to report in her absence.
Thank you, Julia. Members can see the full agenda items in the papers. Yeah, we met. It was an online only meeting. PAC's agenda as normal. The really good news, which is worth noting, is that it was reported to us that all the audit recommendations had been completed. And I don't think either Tom or Moronki's here, but I just wanted to place on record our thanks to them and the team for completing those. So that's obviously very good news. We did a deep dive into whistleblowing for clinics, how clinics whistleblow, and there was good assurance to the committee about the processes in place there. And I think in time we are going to do a further deep dive around how people raise concerns more generally, patients and so on. We had our normal discussion on PRISM and the progress on PRISM, and again that's in the minutes. I think again further progress there. Almost all clinics are now reporting into PRISM, and we're starting to use the data in many different ways. So that's obviously very good. And we had a dry run really of the discussion about Choose a Fertility Clinic, which the authority then discussed on the 5th of November, and in particular some recommendations about what to do with aged data, which I think is reflected in the authority minutes for the 5th of November, and I think the authority agreed with AGC's recommendation. And then finally, just to flag to members, our next meeting on the 3rd of December, we have some training on external audit, which people are welcome to attend, and there's a dial-in facility as well. So I suppose liaise with Ali if anyone wants to attend to that, and we can make sure that you've got the details.
Thanks, Alex. Any questions for AGC? Other than thank you, because I know you've had a lot of work these last couple of months, so thank you all very much. Okay, so now we come to the performance report, which is where at every meeting it's a standing item. We consider the recent performance of the organisation, really as reflected in a range of KPIs, which you have in your papers, and we'll ask both Peter and the various SMT meeting members to comment on various bits of it. So start off with Peter. Also, just to say that poor old Tom Scrinar, who's our finance director, is suffering from a nasty lurgy and had to go home. So hopefully wish him better, but also Peter will sort of step in for Tom whenever Tom was going to report. But starting off with you.
Thanks, Julia. So I'll touch on both performance and sort of morale issues, because I'm going to touch on HR and then hand over to Claire and then Rachel, and then I'll pick up Tom's responsibilities at the end, because I think it makes sense as we segue into a finance discussion. So as Julia said, we measure performance via a number of key performance indicators, KPIs. There are 19 of them. As you can tell, performance is generally good. So 11 of those 19 are green, 2 are amber, 3 are red, and 4 are neutral. I think my colleagues will pick up why some of those KPIs are classed as where they are when they report back. On HR matters, you'll know that we have two sort of KPIs, one related to staff sickness and one relating to turnover. Sickness is generally good in the organisation as a trend. It's recently picked up. That's actually picking up is pregnancy-related sick leave. Again, I don't think there's anything kind of structural to worry about here. And similarly, turnover is on a long, steady increase. So it's bumping up against the top of the 5 to 15% range we like to keep it in. That said, looking ahead to where we know future vacancies have come, I wouldn't be at all surprised that starts to dip down a little. So I'm not worried about that in any real sense at the moment. And on morale, we do an annual staff survey, closed just recently. We've yet to examine the results, but we will do so very shortly. We'll also take that to one of our two all staff. We have 2 staff away days each year, a sort of summer and winter one. The next one is early December. And that gives us an opportunity to play back both, the staff results, but in particular, I think, to sort of agree where we need to focus our actions. Because I think the key, a big part of this is one of the things we always ask staff is, do you believe that action will be taken as a result of this survey? Which is a good indicator of quite a lot, actually, in a way. What I do know from this year is again around about 88% of staff filled in the survey, which for the public sector is really good. It may be down a percentage point, but when you're up in the early 80s, the high 80s, just keeping there is hard work. And on a quick glance, the report, the figures look promising. But say we're in the middle of analysing them, and more generally, at the next AGC, we'll be taking. We do 2 biannual reports on HR matters, and we will be reporting on the staff survey results at AGC. If there are particular actions or things I think the board needs to know, I'll certainly talk more widely about those. But my general sense is that the morale of the organisation looks good, and the HR KPI metrics are, entirely within the kind of range we would expect at the moment. But very happy to take any questions on any of that.
Comment rather than a question, just to say I think that's a brilliant question to add in. Do you think that action will be taken? And I'm not sure many organisations have that question in their surveys. And that's, I think, an indication of confidence that one can ask that question and deal with the answer. So I think that's a brilliant question. I'm just saying that's a very positive thing to be doing and not something I've come across elsewhere. So yeah. I'm not saying that you'll necessarily get lots of complaints, but I'm just commenting that's a very good question to include.
What my understanding from the kind of literature is there's a quite tight correlation between the percentage of people who actually fill in a staff survey is quite tightly related to the extent to which I think anyone will pay any attention to what they say. So I think it tells you quite a lot. It seems a very sort of processy point, but actually it tells you that sort of a lot of people think it's not worth the effort because frankly nothing's going to change. So generally, yes, I can't remember the precise numbers, but the last 3 or 4 surveys have been in the high 80s in terms of numbers of people who've filled the survey in, which is really pleasing.
Yeah, and it's actually that's a very high number, not just for the public sector, but for private sector. For all sectors, it's a really good number. Well, that's great. So we look forward to some of the results. Claire now? Yeah. Okay, can we hand over to Claire?
Thanks, Julia. So just going back to licensing, I just wanted to update members on our kind of continued mission to increase transparency. You'll remember that in the committee papers now that come to authority, the committee chairs updates, we link to the most recent licensing decisions so that anyone can see the most recent decisions, with regulatory decisions, we've called them, on our website. And from the new year, we'll be updating that hopefully on a weekly basis, so people will be able to see very quickly any kind of regulatory action that the HFEA has taken. We'll have to kind of see how long that page grows and kind of whether we split it by year, but I think we're progressing in the right direction on that. In terms of KPIs, I think we mentioned briefly under Francis's item as chair of SAC about that the numbers of applications to SAC had been increasing quite. There was a couple of months where there were a lot of applications. As it says in the text in the report, it seems to be stabilising. But as I said, Caroline, as head of licensing, will come back to the authority with a short report and kind of views on where we might kind of take things further in the spring next year. We've just completed our autumn stakeholder meetings, so members will know we have a patient organisation and a professional stakeholder group meeting. Patient organisation group is quite wide, organisations representing patients across the UK and indeed sort of particular subgroups of patients, if you like. The professional stakeholder group is members of the professional stakeholder groups in the fertility sector and other bodies such as the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the British Medical Association. Similar agendas for both, where we gave an update on HFEA activity since the spring. We gave an overview of the different items coming to authority for discussion and asked for feedback on any of those issues on our reports that have been published. And you'll remember in the September authority, we had a presentation on the HFEA's horizon scanning function and what SCAC in particular are looking at in terms of future scientific and medical developments. And so we gave a similar presentation there, which I think was very well received, particularly by the patient organisation group. Members will know that last week on Thursday, we published the Fertility Sector, previously called the State of the Sector. I'm not going to say too much about that now because it's an item for discussion on the agenda with Anne Harrod talking about that and Sharon talking about inspection feedback. So I'll leave it for later on. Press interest continues, particularly in the areas of egg donation and unlicensed sperm donation, which there's been very widespread national coverage in recent weeks. And I wanted to note that the House of Commons Women's and Equality Select Committee has just started a call for evidence into egg donation, egg freezing, as well as some related issues, and will certainly be putting together evidence based on the data we collect both on our register and from other sources. And also noting that ESHRA has out for consultations points for discussion on family limits and how they may be applied across the European Union, recognising that Great Britain is no longer in the European Union, but there may be some lessons we can take, and we'll also be reviewing those guidelines. In terms of kind of what else is happening in terms of our licensing and committee work on my side, members will be aware we're carrying out our annual committee effectiveness review. So thank you for any time and ideas you have on that. We tend to remind you of what you said last year, and if you still agree with it, and any kind of changes you'd like to make this year. So that's all the Statutory Approvals Committee, the Licence Committee, the Executive Licensing Panel, which either Tom or I chair, and SCAC from my side, and then obviously you've done Board Effectiveness review separately. And those committee effectiveness reviews come to the authority in March, together with any recommendations for changes, and if there are any consequent recommendations to changes for standing orders. A few other things to mention. One relates to the decision on the future publication of the full CAFCA, which authority met earlier in November, and agreed the minutes, and the YouTube is available online for anyone who wants to watch that. So we're now implementing the authority's decision. So Kevin Hudson is working on the verification of data with clinics. There's a letter that's gone from Peter to all PRs at the end of last week, outlining the decision, and we'll reiterate that in Clinic Focus, which will go out either the end of this week or the beginning of next week, and then we'll supplement that with further both clinic and patient information towards publication date, both towards the end of this year and early next year. Early November was National Fertility Awareness Week, and we took part in several activities in there. I think both Rachel and I had done separate kind of pre-recorded interviews and podcasts, which were then used by various of our patient organisation stakeholder groups. And particular thanks, I know that many authority members help us a lot with media work, but particularly to Tim and Geeta and Zainab, who we've called upon quite a lot in recent months, and thank you very much for your help and availability. I should mention that in the performance report, there's a very small error in that I think the performance report says there are 90 proactive media mentions and 2 reactive, and it should be the other way around. So just for the record, there were proactive media mentions 2 and reactive 90. Apologies for any misunderstanding on that. Sorry, lastly, Julia, sorry, I didn't read my notes properly. We're planning for a future event for PRs at the end of April 2026. So members will remember we had for several years and then kind of interrupted by COVID. We had one since COVID, an event for all PRs across the UK to come together with us to discuss issues relating to the fertility sector and regulation. We haven't done one for a couple of years, and that's now planned for the end of April 2026. An invitation has been sent directly to all PRs, and we look forward to seeing as many as possible then.
Thanks, Claire. I think the PR event will be very well received. I mean, certainly over the last few months, PRs who I've met have said, "Oh, you're going to be doing that again." And I think, already actually we only sent out invitations, and we've already been getting emails in saying suggestions for the agenda or what they want to do or whatever. So I think it's really very positive, and we'll keep you posted about the agenda for that and so forth. Other than that, I mean, to the extent that you need any help from members on evidence for the Women's Equalities Commission, please let us know, because I think it's it's quite widely based, so it's a really good opportunity to get some of the concerns that we have out there, and whatever we can do to help, just let us know. Any questions for Claire, particularly at the moment? Geeta.
Question. First of all, great stuff, Claire, and particularly in the media and social media engagement, as always, there's a constant flow of positive activity, and thank you for that. And I also noticed that there's a constant flow of FOIs as well, which seem to be handled extremely well, like within the target period. So as regards to website, I don't know what you mean by website sessions, and are we tracking for website as well as social media, who is engaging with us? Are they from the sector, or do we have patients and other people engaging? We need to track that.
I might hand over to Anne Harrod, who's our head of communications, to particularly look at that. Is that okay? Thank you.
We don't particularly track where we don't particularly track where in the sector people are coming from, but we can see where people have referred to. They've looked on, say, Google, or even in the last year, we've now had 70,000 people come to the website from ChatGPT, which means that we are starting to get pick up in that way. So we can see if someone's come from, say, LinkedIn or Instagram, but that wouldn't necessarily tell us who they are.
Anything else? Rosamond.
Just related to all of that, was there any, I'm sure there was, reflection, you note, for example, 7 months below average activity, and I just wondered if you've been able to track what that was related to. Website sessions, I mean, sorry.
So this is something that we're seeing in common with lots of other public bodies, and we think is largely related to either use of ChatGPT or other algorithms, can't think of the word, or when you go on Google and you get the AI generated summary. I know we probably all use that and thought that's probably right. This is something, so we have got some ring fence funding from DHSE to make improvements to our website of the next year. And one of the things that the person who's going to be doing that work is going to look at all the kind of different ways that you can maximise getting the website out there, and also other things like whether there's a lot of information on our website. I've been here nearly 8 years. I found a page I'd never seen before the other day, whether, for example, a chat what's on the website would help people, once they're on our website, to find things more easily. So hopefully over the next few months I can come with some updates on, you know, what we found from that. I don't know, Anne Harry, do you want to say anything more?
Yeah, we are in touch with other public bodies. I'm going to be meeting them in the next couple of weeks. There's one public body that claims they've turned their fortunes around in terms of their website. So I'm all ears with what they have to tell us.
Thank you. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you. I'll start by talking about the opening the register team. You can see from the KPIs that the waiting list is still being reduced effectively. It did slightly slow in October, which is mainly due to complex issues. Not every application is straightforward and might need some further information or individual responses being written. And that takes away one of the members of the team who is involved in signing off the routine cases away from that. But, you know, the team do work really well. They work independently, and I think they should be really congratulated on the headway that they've made into significantly reducing the waiting list. One of the issues that we are seeing is we write to clinics for various checks that we need within the process, and it's becoming very frustrating that the team have to chase these requests after several weeks of waiting. So at the moment, I'm having oversight of all these clinics where we've been waiting for more than a couple of months for information. And I'm writing to each of those and to the PRs to remind them of their legal requirement to provide that information in a timely manner, because it is now significantly delaying applicants getting their information. We'll also be taking that to an inspectors meeting in the new year to see how we can sort of tie this up with regulatory compliance, to see if there's anything that we can do with clinics that are repeat offenders for not getting information back to us. But certainly, you know, from the new year, we will be taking a much tougher stance with clinics that don't reply back to us. Secondly, our head of information moved on in September. I mentioned last time we were recruiting to the post. I'm pleased to say that post has been recruited to, and we're looking forward to the new person starting in post from the 1st to 15th of December. In terms of inspections, we've got a busy schedule. It's certainly up on last year's number, and we have a busy fourth quarter of the year. The inspectors are also supporting projects like the Phoenix IT project, which is there to modernise our systems for inspection and licensing. Just important to note, like we do in most meetings, that some reports do breach the KPIs. These are mainly due to complexities where further information is requested from clinics, further meetings with the PR, involvement from the senior team or legal. And there's also practical issues sometimes that we might require further information, further paperwork from clinics, and certain key members of staff are on leave. So we have to juggle this post-inspection. It's important though to note that this is normal, and we do monitor the KPIs, and it's right, we do review KPIs, but it's right that we do keep the KPIs as they are, because the majority of reports should be meeting this KPI, and we will monitor that. We would monitor it, and if it became a problem, we would start to look at our resources and how our team is working. But at the moment, the reasons for those breaches are part of the inspection process, and I don't have any concerns from a team perspective at all.
Thank you, Rachel. Any comments or questions for Rachel? So Peter, you're stepping in for Tom to cover the financial position, and then why don't you segue straight into item 6, which is the 2026-27 budget proposal.
Fine, Julia, thanks. So before I get to the financial position itself, you'll note we have 3 finance KPIs, 2 of which are green. The one that is slightly stubbornly red is debt collection within 40 days. It's not that we don't manage to collect the debt, it's just that we struggle to make this particular KPI. And as you can see in the note to it, in fact, you know, about 90% of debt is in within 60 days, and there's a longish tail. These are often related to you know, a couple of clinics sort of thing, but it is just difficult to get it. I'm sort of loath to move the KPI in a sense, because although we are looking at it more generally, because As I say, I don't think it points to any bigger structural problem. We do get the debt in, it's just we struggle to make it within the particular KPI. Obviously, happy to take any question on that, but if I might turn to the finance report itself. So this covers the period to the end of October 2025. And I think the headline position, as you'll know from previous discussions, is we have been for a while now forecasting a fairly significant deficit end year. I hasten to that end year because at the moment the deficit is quite modest, but against our forecast, the deficit end year is quite significant. I'll come to that in a minute. Since we first identified this problem, we've taken a range of actions to try and reduce it. But we've also identified a number of additional pressures, and those pressures are mainly linked to IT, particularly the cost of licenses and the Phoenix programme. In terms of other pressures, we've got pressures in terms of staff members on maternity leave, which obviously increases costs. And as Rachel's already mentioned, there's a higher number of inspections this year and so on. So, you know, there are some sort of costs we can't control, like the cost of licenses. There is activity costs because we've got more inspections to do, and there are particular issues around HR in terms of, say, things like maternity leave recovery and the like. Now, having looked at this quite closely, we don't think at this stage that we will be able to reduce our deficit to zero by the end of the year. So for the wider sort of public benefit, public bodies on the whole are not expected to make a profit. They're expected to come in pretty much at zero. In other words, our income and expenditure equally match. I think we're going to struggle to do that. We've just been discussions with the department at the sort of end of second quarter with them about this. They certainly recognise the problems we're under and we're taking the right kind of measures. We also recognise this is a particularly tough year for the department. So we're certainly not expecting the department to somehow magically bail us out of this problem. The proposal we put to the department is that we should be aiming for a deficit of about 200k, whereas the projected deficit we're looking at the moment is a bit north of 400k. Given the inevitable variability of our income, the department does give us some flexibility on this. We don't have to come in absolutely on zero. We're still waiting for a response from the department on that, but we are taking the 200k position as our target, if you like, to get there. So as I said, at the end of October, in the papers, you'll find that our end year forecast, so that's end March, is 411. And that the two components of that are an under recovery of income by 286 and an overspend against expenditure of 125. So how do we get there? So there are a couple of accounting provisions towards the end of the year which will reverse out that end year and will take quite a bit of that deficit out. But that said, we still need to reduce our expenditure forecasts. So what we're doing at the moment is we scrutinise all decisions that have a financial consequence at the senior management team, including all recruitment proposals. We look at things like the timing of recruitment. We look at gapping posts for a while. Equally, I ought to make you aware there are risks in terms of legal spend, which can be volatile and out of our control as well. And in saying that we look at things like recruitment decisions and the gapping of posts, I'm also very conscious that puts pressure on the staff that remain. Because ideally, you'd want people who are coming in, you know, there to be no gaps, but actually in practice, I mean, that's often difficult to achieve in practice, given people's notice. But it also means that if we do decide to stretch things out by a couple of months, what we're also doing is putting more pressure on the staff that remain. But we do need to get to a position where that forecast deficit is halved effectively. And as Julie said, we've drafted a budget proposal for 26-27, and which I'll come to in a minute. But I'll sort of pause there, if you like, and invite any questions about the financial position it is now before going on to next year's budget provision.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. That's very helpful. The IT costs and the overspend, I think, on page 45 is 154k, and a lot of it is Office and Dynamics licenses. I do wonder if our department colleagues, you think how many organisations under the department auspices spend on Microsoft, and I just do wonder if our department colleagues could help us with some bargaining there to get that down. I don't know if we could make that request.
I think that's a good point. I think you're right. It's a similar argument, isn't it, to the NHS properly using its procurement provisions. I mean, they buy in such enormous quantities, they ought to get better prices. And I think it's probably the same is true. So that's, if we haven't already, and forgive me if I'm not on top of this, we've certainly explored that with the department.
Catherine.
Yes, thank you, Peter. You've already alluded to the extra pressure on staff of keeping posts vacant. Given that there has been a recent increase in the turnover rate, is there anything coming out in the exit interviews which would suggest that staff are particularly aware of the additional pressures because of vacant posts?
I haven't examined it, but so we've got a paper coming to the audit committee next month on exit interviews. I must admit, I haven't reviewed them all yet, so I don't know. What I can say, Catherine, for you, I know you're unable to join us until just now, is I did give a very briefest of summaries about the staff survey, which will also be coming to the audit committee, which on the is looking very promising. So I think it's undoubtedly true that many of our staff are very busy. What I'm not seeing is that having a significant impact on morale. And to the best of my knowledge, I can't think of a staff exit where the primary reason given is I'm just having, the pressure is too great. They're much more related to things like promotion opportunities, time for a change, etc., etc. But you'll get proper detail at the audit committee next month.
Anya.
Mine was very similar to Catherine's, actually, is what measures are we putting in place to keep staff morale as high, but it sounds like you're on it.
Any other questions for Peter? I mean, clearly, it's a pretty big ask to come in at 200k, given where we are now, and you only got a few weeks more to do it. But I think the plan is quite robust, and we just have to hope that we're mindful of the pressures on staff, and anything we can do to help with that, just let us know. Okay, Peter, do you want to carry on now onto the budget proposal?
In one sense, I'll take the paper as read, but it's probably worth me drawing attention to various things, and probably as well for people listening online or later, it's probably worth saying just something really obvious, at least to the authority members, but perhaps not to outside. So the HFEA is funded by a mix of fees levied on the sector we regulate and what's called granting aid from the Department of Health. And the really crucial thing to take from that is 95% of our income comes from the fees and only 5% from the granting aid. And the reason why that's important is the fees are related to the activity levels in the sector. So they clearly can go up or down, whereas the granting aid is an agreed figure that we know how to manage. So what all this, the context for this discussion is that budget setting in that particular environment is always quite problematic, because effectively the income side of our equation is always subject to volatility, whereas the expenditure side on the whole is much better set. So that's the sort of background of this. And as I said in the last discussion, the aim here is for us to come in effectively so that income and expenditure balance each other out. We're not supposed to make neither a profit or a loss. In order, our estimate, what's set out in the paper is that our estimate looking next year, in order to deliver our statutory duties and complete the current IT transformation program, so that's Phoenix, we believe that we need to increase the overall expenditure requirement of the HFEA by around 5%. Now, in terms of why do we say that? So the cost increases basically relate to staff and IT costs. That's partly mixed, that's driven by a mix of inflationary pay and price growth. as we've just had in that previous exchange. I mean, IT licenses are up about 13% at the moment, and other sorts of IT costs are going up at a rate far exceeding inflation. And also, as we enter the next financial year, so that's 26-27, we have a number of additional fixed-term posts that are providing cover for maternity leave, which I've mentioned already, or who are supporting the final part of the Phoenix programme. Some of those costs clearly ought to reduce over time as people come back after maternity leave, and indeed as Phoenix winds down. And the growth figure is sort of complicated a bit by the final long tail of PRISM, in the sense that the budget, it's clear to us now, as should have been clear from the previous discussion, that the budget we set in 25-26 was not high enough to meet our expectations. And this relates to the volatility of the income. So if you like, we're already starting from a low base. So in terms of, so what are we going to do looking forward? We want to make sure we're keeping a proper handle on our costs. So as Phoenix ends in 26-27, we're going to be undertaking a full review of our IT spend requirements, and in particular license costs. And thank you, Alex, for your suggestion as well about talking to the department. Our aim is to, we'll be trying to reduce those costs as far as we can. I've already mentioned fees and the particular problem that volatility has. Our volume forecasts for this year are currently sort of looking at within an acceptable range of accuracy. But basically, we've had to revise our assumptions about the value of fees received. In part, that's because a few clinics are still playing catch up on PRISM. So because the cycle, which we haven't yet received the detail of, took place when the fee was a different level, instead of us just being able to multiply the number of expected fees by the same denominator, effectively, some of them are less. We're assuming for 26-27 that about 5% of our invoices will be charged at the previous year's rate. And the activity, we think for 26-27 is roughly going to be the same as 25-26. If you go back over time, what we see is a slow, steady growth in treatment activity, leaving aside the big disruption of COVID. And what you find in the paper at section 3, you can find that what we've tried to do is sketch out. Section 4, we've tried to set out a series of scenarios, and they are based on the level of the grant in aid. So as I said at the start, it's the rough ratio is 95-5. But sometimes the department does give us slightly more, which can impact on this. So scenario 1 effectively is a sort of minimum grant in aid requirement scenario, and that effectively is merely the funding required to cover the OTR service, which we can't charge for. And we expect the OTR service to be coming in at something in the region of 368,000. The other two scenarios, as it says there, do relate to a spending review bid, which has not yet been resolved. In fact, all spending reviews have not been resolved with the department, which would see GIA increase from 368 to just over 500, and then on the most optimistic scenario up to 835. We think it's very much prudent to assume in all of our planning that we'll get the lowest level of granting expected. As I say, the pressures on the department are really very, very tight this year. Clearly, if we do receive the higher amount, which also, and the reason we've got different amounts in there is they relate to bids to allow us to invest further in our IoT systems. They will then support automation and efficiencies and the like. That will allow us a bit more slack. But let's assume the tightest grant in aid settlement. Then we think then that the basic IVF fee measure needs to increase by 20%. In other words, from £100 to £120. We don't say that lightly. It's clearly a significant increase. If you look back over a longer period of time, we've actually been successful in limiting fee increases historically. For a number of years, they didn't go up at all. and we did so in an environment where actually our core GIA funding was decreasing. So as government funding has increased, on the whole, we've managed to keep fees not to just increase to cover up the gap. But what we're looking at the moment, given the uncertainty over the scenarios, is authority approval to commence discussions with the department and the Treasury. And we do need Treasury approval for any fee increase. Based on that prudent estimate. So that would be a 20% increase in the IVF activity fee level and a 12.5% increase on the DI activity. Now, once we get clarity on granting aid for 26-27, we can revise our budget accordingly. And if we get a slightly more generous settlement, then the feeling is we'd like to revise that fee increase down. So say from 20% increase to 15% increase. But what I can't say at this stage is, which we can do, what we have thought long and hard about is, I think particularly after this current year's experience, I think going for an unrealistically low level of expenditure requirement will only see us potential or increase the likelihood of repeating the same exercise we've had to go through this, where around about the midpoint of the year, we have to look again at expenditure and so on. And it's probably prudent and more sensible, we think, to have a conversation looking for the larger increase, which if we get certainty on the granting aid, we can bring back down, than being a little over optimistic about what's possible. So I hope that's a reasonable sensible sort of introduction to the issues. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Peter. Catherine. Yes, thank you, Peter. Very helpful. I agree that the proposed percentages are a significant hike up. I think it's right and proper to take them in the context of fee increases over a decade and beyond, or rather the absence of them, or the paucity of them. I'd say I think it's very significant that although in absolute terms they seem high, actually in relative terms to the cost of IVF treatment, whether NHS funded or private, it's really very relatively small. And I think that for me, the paper does argue very persuasively that we're not seeking to feather our nest. We're seeking to be confident that we can maintain public protection by an effective regulatory system. And I think providing we expend some time on comms to ensure that it's entirely clear to everyone, patients, stakeholders, obviously the Department and Treasury, that there are three crux differences in the market that we're now regulating, just as you've outlined. So a changed market, a changed pattern of licensed activity, different licensing inspection and inspection requirements, plus our renewed commitment to innovation and scientific and medical innovations, plus our commitment to increased data to patients and a good response and a quick response and a timely response to concerns of theirs. I think putting all of those together, it seems to me that we have a powerful argument and that we are not being unreasonable. And in fact, we're being prudent in making this suggestion at the time. So for all those reasons, I'm entirely supportive, and I appreciate your caveat about what we receive in GIA. And I think it's right and proper that we reconsider once we know that. But in principle, I'm 100% behind you.
Tom.
Thanks. Just a few questions, if that's okay. But first off, I just wanted to note, with the caveats that I'm terrible at economics, but I did look at the inflationary rate and what the impact that would be if we took our 2006-07 funding level.
Hang on, sorry, Tom, you're not on the thing, so they can't.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologies. So with the caveat about my economic skills, but I did want to start off with a point, which is if you look at the 2006-07 fee rate and consider inflationary impact on what that would be, what you're proposing is still actually, to my understanding, much below that. So actually, we're still much lower than where we were sort of in that period. The question that I had was, well, one question was, do we think that this is enough? Are you confident that it's the right level? Because I think, just as you say, it would be sensible to grade downwards. It would be detrimental to say we think it's this and then have to go up. So just some assurance around that. And then the second, and just to say, I also agree with the proposals, but I feel it's incumbent on us to ask you about this. Is, have we really actually looked at the services? Are you fully confident that if we don't do this, it will impact on the provision of the regulatory impact that we should be having, because we should be putting patient safety at the heart of it? But also, we do want to promote a service. Having no service at all is not a good thing. So we don't want this to detrimentally impact the sector beyond what it should be. So are you confident that there's nothing else that we could do in that space? But as I said, that's all in the context of me actually agreeing with the paper.
Taking the order you raised them, Tom. So you're right. I mean, in one sense, the you know what it's like when you're showing change over time. Where you start from changes the numbers enormously. We even chose a range of numbers that actually show us, you know, it's quite a tight range of numbers. We could have chosen some numbers which shows over longer term, the HFEA fee has not kept pace with inflation. I mean, but it is a question of where you measure from. So I don't want to just be accused of picking my measures. But you're right. In the round, the fee is, you know, not dissimilar to inflation. It's certainly not gone up in any significant way. Is it enough? That's a really good challenge. So the difficulty here, and again, I'm conscious of the sort of wider public that might be listening in, is what we don't want to do, given that most of our income comes from the sector itself and often is then paid directly by the people having treatment, is get too much money in. And because we can't spend more than our budget as well, simply effectively putting that money in the reserve. We could, I think our view is that unless treatment numbers really do dip in a way that I think the trends suggest they don't, 120 looks right, and 125, say, would almost certainly result in you know, something would have to be very strange to treatment patterns to do anything other than actually meaning quite a large sum of money goes into our reserve. But we did think long and hard about this, and it is a really good challenge, because I think the risk is you sort of end up, because with any sort of fee increase, you think I must limit this to the minimum possible, and then all you do is create the same pressure for next year. So these obviously are forecasts, but I think our view is 120 ought to be enough on the basis of historic trends. On your question about have we also done enough to look at our costs, well, I suppose one way of thinking about this is, what does that involve? Overwhelmingly, the largest single item of our costs is staff. So if we are to make, and so a 20, you know, if we're looking for a 20% increase in our income, that's, you know, it's not quite a 20% decrease. There is no way we could find savings of 20% that would not directly impact on the statutory services we do. It would certainly mean that we'd have to look very seriously at staffing numbers, because we just can't get to those numbers without doing that. And we could find ourselves in the sort of position whereby, you know, let's say we prioritise the inspection and licensing team but then we'd have absolutely no facility whatsoever to engage in any serious communications efforts and a big part of our strategy is how do we better inform patients so they can make more informed decisions, and so on and so forth. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I think my view is, I mean, all organisations can probably find a little bit of something to do less of, but I think cuts of this order are not possible without making quite serious cuts in statutory services.
Alex Nengi.
I think you're probably going to give the same answer to my question, Peter. But I, like others, I support the two recommendations, and thank you for showing your workings and exactly where you've gone through. You mentioned in 5.5 that the HFEA is doing a full fee review in 26-27, and I'm sure more on that in due course. But I don't know the last time we also did the zero budgeting exercise, and I just wondered if we are doing a fee review, whether we should do a zero budgeting exercise alongside that to match income and expenditure. But I appreciate that's kind of quite a lot of work.
So the last time we did something that looks a bit like a zero budgeting exercise was in respect to the most recent spending review, where effectively what the Treasury requirement was not take your current position and roll it forward. It was start again and work it up. So it wasn't a full zero budgeting review, but it was a similar sort of exercise. Clearly, we could do that. We could do something similar again, or actually we could start from that particular exercise. But as I said, I think our strong view is that in order to deliver the statutory services we are required to do, to inspect, to license, to hold a register, to be able to receive data, to make that data available for people in order to make decisions, in order to maintain a code of practice that provides a guidance to the sector, and so on and so forth. For next year, and given the demands on the IT transformation programs, the amount of money we require is the amount of money in paper.
Thank you, Peter. I support the recommendation. You made a very clear case for it. The fee is passed on to the patient, so it is sensitive, and it's £20 increase. It's not small. You just answered the question about the full fee review structure to ensure fair regulation is fair. The thing about, you mentioned about the fee could be reduced to 115 if higher grant income is achieved. When do you know that, and how do you adjust it? And will the comms bit, once again, I agree with Catherine, comms around this is extremely important to make it robust and positive. Does that come from DHSC or does that come from HFEA?
No, the communication is very much, I think it's for us to clearly explain what we're doing and why to the department. It's just that in the HFE Act itself, actually we require departmental and Treasury approval for any fee increase. And what we've also said in the past, we like to give clinics sufficient, what we don't like to do is write to them and say, next week the fees are going up. So one of the reasons that we're coming to you with the paper now is to provide sufficient time for a discussion with the Treasury so we can give clinics reasonable knowledge about a fee increase, which ideally would time from the 1st of April next year. We ought to know before Christmas about the grant in aid issue. So effectively, I think from the department's position, my understanding is they ought to be in a position by the end of Q3, so that's the end of December, to know about this. So I would hope that we could be coming back to you, whether in a paper or verbally, at the January meeting, saying as a result of those discussions, we believe we do need to go ahead with the 120 or the 115. So this is had we been having the meeting a few weeks later, there's a chance we would know. So the scenarios are there partly just to cover this uncertainty point at the moment.
Okay, so I think, Peter, looking at sort of nods around the table, you've got broad agreement. I think obviously we are interested in what the GIA will be, and we need to keep this under close consideration. I think the fact that the paper also mentions the intention to do a full-scale fee review during 26-27 it's probably long overdue. I mean, in the sense that you know, the sector has changed sort of beyond recognition in a very short space of time, and therefore I think the idea that we're going to look at fees is a really good one. And so this is, if you like, a 1 to 2 year stopgap, which is nonetheless very important. But I think it's very important, and I think members are sort of buying into this, that, you know, we are able to continue without a break in services, because, you know, that will affect patients negatively, and that's not what we do. So that's great. And also, just thank you for stepping in at the very last moment on numbers, which nobody ever wants to do. So thank you very much. I mean, one of the more serious things that came out of the board effectiveness review when people were filling in the survey is they wanted a comfort break in the middle of these meetings. And so don't say I don't listen. So we're now going to have a 10-minute break, literally just 10 minutes, and we'll come back at 2:25. I think now, sorry, I put that on, and also, sorry, I've got a cough I can't get rid of. So we've, as you know, last week our fertility sector report was published, which is really good. And we also use it to look at a little bit at sort of a review of how we're doing, how our clinics are doing, how the inspections are going, and so forth. And so we've got a sort of double act session, which is great, which is going to be run by Harrod Thomas, who's our head of communications, and Sharon Fenson-Rimmer, who everybody knows is the chief inspector. And they're going to be talking to us both about the fertility sector report and some of the key inspection feedback that came out of that. Thanks. Over to you, ladies.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to start by thanking members who've played a part in reviewing and having some input into this report, which has been surprisingly well received. We decided to make some changes this year, including having the main points as an infographic, because, you know, we looked around at what other regulators were doing, and while some have full easy read versions of their reports, which we can't quite do, we wanted to make it much more accessible to our different audiences. Moving on to the key messages. Obviously, the number of incidents rose by 36%, but that's still fewer than, you know, that's less than 1% of cycles. The rise was mainly in grade C incidents, and among that rise in grade C incidents, around a third were clinic administration incidents, which we know from the National Patient Survey really matter to patients, you know, when the admin hasn't gone quite right, and we will continue to monitor trends over time. It is important to note that none were grade A incidents, the most serious category. The non-compliances found at inspection actually decreased. This is due in large part to the fact there were fewer inspections this year because of licence length changes during COVID. But of course, this is another area where we'll continue to monitor trends over time. And what's interesting is how it's been received. We shared it with stakeholder groups ahead of publication, and a number of stakeholder organisations have shared the report across their own channels, mainly patient-facing organisations and one professional body. Social media, it's performed particularly well on LinkedIn, where we have professional audiences where they've been sharing it, reposting. It's also had a pretty good showing on Instagram, which is a more patient-facing audience, and about average in terms of views and engagement. But given the report really focuses on the regulatory work, that's quite pleasing. It says around 1,000 views of the report on the website within the first 48 hours. That's now more than 3,000 after 6 days, which interestingly is double the amount of views that last year's report had received in the first week. So there might be something in the change of approach that we've brought in, but we'll continue to see how it performs. In terms of press coverage, there's been one piece of coverage in BioNews, even though the press release itself was issued very widely and viewed by national and broadcast journalists. Interesting then to only have the one piece. Now, this could be because correspondents see healthcare in the round, they see reports from right across the health sector, and might have just made the editorial judgment that a rise of 200 incidents in one sector, while that sector is still overwhelmingly safe, is, you know, nothing to write home about, almost literally. The BioNews headline itself was, in fact, that adverse events occur in less than 1% of UK fertility treatments. So, you know, we've been very, very transparent in publicising, you know, the incidents we have, the type of incidents, and it just nods to the increasing transparency that Claire discussed earlier. So all in all, we'll continue to see how the report performs and make any changes we need to make next year. Concludes that. Shall I take questions now, or I'll hand over to Aaron?
Why don't you carry on with chat and then we'll.
Okay, post-inspection feedback. I just want, before I dive into this, I'd like to thank the inspectors and then later on business support for sending out the surveys post-inspection. It does take time to do, but they are very good at doing that. Just want to say thank you to the team for doing that. And also for business support for collating the survey as well. Again, that takes a lot of time to do that. When we get the feedback, I think it's really important that as inspectors, we are open to the feedback. And sometimes that feedback may not be what we want to see, but it's really important that we look at our processes and learn from them. And the numbers that we are getting back are not always very large, those numbers from clinics. On the next slide, you will see that there is a spike in numbers of those surveys received back. That's because we asked business support to resend them out again to see if we can get more clinics, PRs to reply back to us. So we are constantly monitoring that. But it isn't a big number, but it is important that we do look at the survey and continue to get clinics to give us that feedback. Next slide, please. So these are the number of responses per month. 24 clinics completed the survey between that time period. And that spike from the March, May and July is because we asked business support, as I said previously, to send the surveys back out and to proactively encourage clinics. So on inspection, inspectors were asking PRs at the closeout meetings, please feed back to us, which is what we still do. So just going through some of the slides, they are kind of split into sections, the pre-inspection process, during the inspection and post-inspection. So they are, you know, the questions are, as they are quite easy to interpret, but a lot of the responses received back strongly agreed that the SAQ helped centre staff prepare for the inspection, which is really, really important, that we do get that feedback. We have had some narrative.
Just say.
Oh, sorry, I thought you all. Sorry. The SAQ is a self-assessment questionnaire. This is the self-assessment questionnaire that goes out to clinics and PRs prior to the inspection process starting. And it has a whole stream of questions about their clinic processes, what they do, what type of treatments, and that gets fed back into the inspectors, which helps them do the DBA process. We then have a further question on the DBA process, asking, does the DBA process help clinics prepare for the inspection? And that was really, really nice to see that 100% strongly agreed that the DBA process is clearly explained and it does help them to prepare for the inspection, which is really important, as this was something that we implemented as part of the pandemic response. We also asked questions around, has there been any impact to patients during the inspection? And this is really important that we get this feedback, because at no point should an inspection interfere with the operation of a clinic and how a clinic is run. And one clinic responded that patients were inconvenienced by the inspection. I think it's important to add that that was fed back to the team in the inspection meetings. And it's also important to add that these questionnaires are anonymous, so we don't know which clinics these are. But it is important that we reflect on that, and it's made clear to the team that when they're on inspection, that at no point should the inspection process interfere with how the clinic is being run. Communication between the clinic staff and the inspectors is really important to us. We want good communication. And this was quite nice to see that 15 agreed that there was enough time to discuss the inspection findings during the inspection. And that's really important, that, as the inspection process continues throughout the day, that when items are non-compliances are being identified, that those are being discussed, and that was good to see in that. Again, this is really important that clinic staff can discuss those findings with the inspectors, and 85% felt that they were able to discuss those findings. So there was that two-way communication, which is really important. And it's important that we reflect on that as well, that there is opportunity to discuss those findings. It's really important that when we produce a report, that it's clear and it reflects the inspection findings, which can often be difficult because we report by exception. But 15 strongly agreed that the report was accurate and clearly presented. So that was really important. But then again, I think there are areas to move on going forward. One area we are really interested in is, does the inspection process promote continual improvement amongst clinics? And the feedback we got was that a lot of clinics felt that that did promote learning and continual improvement. And that was really important. And I think the DBA does help with that process. It gets clinics to prepare for those inspections. So I think it's really important that we learn from our survey results. We want clinics to respond to the survey, and we do actively try to encourage clinics to do that. We encourage the inspectors always have that discussion at the closeout meeting. We want to reflect on that survey. We want to look at the feedback, and we do get free text narrative comments, which I do have a selection here. And we do feed that back into the inspectors as well at the team meetings when we do get some narrative comments. And we want to feed back on the process. We want to improve. We want to get better. We want to make changes so that clinics do engage and feel it's a productive process. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Anne, Howard and Sharon. That was great. I see quite a few hands up. So Francis, I think, and then I'll come to everybody.
Quick question. I know your replies are anonymous, but I noticed it's often one and the number disagree or strongly agree. Do you know if all those negative comments came from the same place, even if you don't know what that place is?
No, we wouldn't know that. It is anonymous.
Sharon, you turn your mic off when you finish. Yeah. Thank you. Steve.
Thank you, Sharon, for those interesting data. There were a couple of slides where there was what I thought quite a high proportion of people who weren't happy in terms of a proportion of the total number of people that sent the survey back. My comment really is around if I'm right in assuming that this goes to PRs to complete, might you get more information if you sent it to other members of the team who in reality are probably more involved in the inspection than with respect the PR is on the day?
That's a really good suggestion, and we'll take that back. Thank you.
Catherine, and then Geeta, and then.
Yes, Sharon, thank you very much. It's obviously a disappointingly small sample group, given the number of inspections, and you know, I haven't done the statistical analysis, but I'm not sure that we could draw any firm conclusions from such a sample set. But I think it would be useful to benchmark what is the response rate for our fellow regulators within the department who inspect. Most of them do. And if we find that theirs is significantly different, could we have an analysis of what are they doing differently and how have they secured a higher response rate? That's one point. I think it would be useful for us to know how many questions you ask, and in future reports for us to see the full responses rather than a selection, if that's what this was. I don't know whether it was, but you know, if there are many more questions asked, I think it would be very useful, and in particular to see the free text responses, please. And my last point, following on from Francis, is whilst I can absolutely see that it's important to offer the opportunity for feedback to be anonymous, I think it's quite normal these days to also offer the opportunity to put a name to a submission, and that might be particularly useful where the feedback is less than positive and important to feedback to individual inspectors, etc.
Geeta.
Thank you. The first one is about fertility sector one. Just really, can you hear me here? About severe and critical OHSS, when there's still 67 women who ended up with severe and critical OHSS. It would be good to know afterward in area of line as to what follow-up is taking place to prevent this further at a time when we have lots of preventative measures clinically to achieve that. And you mentioned that that did not include egg donors. So just the question, were there any shared egg donors in that one, or did you, when you say egg donors, did you include shared egg donors as well?
I think. Oh, I have it.
Oh, sorry. Apologies. Yeah.
I think I can pick that one up offline and he'll come back with you. I'm not sure whether it includes egg sharers.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Can I just stop Sharon? Sharon, thank you for that. It's very, very helpful to get that feedback. And I agree with my colleagues, Steve, saying getting clinic staff who really do all the work for inspection to get their feedback rather than just PRs. And also Catherine's comment about the sample being very small and how can we incentivize or motivate more people to respond. You mentioned that 12 agreed about SAQ self-assessment questionnaires, and 7 did not agree, and that's quite high number of, that sounds very small sample. You'd be quick to understand, maybe if it's time to stick it here afterwards as to what is it they were saying, because that's where it is triggered for inspections. And also 85% agreed about communication with the staff about inspection findings. That's, I suppose, before you get the PR response back, not after it's concluded. And finally, did you ask, yes, I missed that, Sharon, questions, feedback about the people who inspected? And what response did you get about the people?
Sharon.
I'm not sure which question to take first. Regarding, we do get free text comments, and often those are complimentary or feedback about individual staff members. Regarding the SAQ, often some of the feedback is that the SAQ form is difficult to navigate, it's difficult to submit, and we're hoping with the IT input and the IT improvements that will improve as well. So that will answer the SAQ. I totally agree that getting all of the staff to reply back to the survey, I think will give us a good picture as well. Which we will take that forward.
Sharon.
Sorry.
Oh. Can I just go to Rachel Cutting first, because I think she wants to come in on this, and then Graham, and then Alison.
Yeah, it's just to say that we developed these a new style post-inspection feedback through SurveyMonkey a couple of years ago, to make it a lot easier for clinics to fill in and to analyse. So the return rate was low, but I can assure you it has increased and got much better, because the inspectors are used to that routine of telling the PR at inspection, and also business support are chasing that up when we don't get a response now. So we will certainly have a look at other regulators, but I am happier now with the response rate. We also, to address a comment that Catherine said about, because they're anonymous, there is now a link on the bottom to Sharon's email address to say that if you're unhappy about any part of the inspection, any findings, then please email Sharon as the Chief Inspector to discuss. So we have that option there as well. There are quite a lot of questions there. I think there are 27 in total, and to go through those each individually would have taken quite a long time today. What we tried to do today is pick out more the process ones, not necessarily related to the KPIs, like the length of time it took for the PR to get the report, because you're well aware of those from the performance report that we show. So, but we're more than happy. I'm more than happy to go through, Catherine, if you wanted to have a look in any more detail at any point. And as Sharon said, the Phoenix project is there to improve the IT systems. The SAQ, when you're submitting it, can be quite clunky. It's working out what pages, it can fail as it's being submitted and get stuck in the portal. And part of the Phoenix project is to improve that. So hopefully in terms of that, we will get an improvement in that.
Sharon, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Rachel. I think to also add, where PRs have got some significant feedback and they do need to speak to me, they do contact me, and we do have those meetings where they want to provide specific feedback, whether that's about the process, the report, findings, and they do meet with me, and we do have those meetings, and we do feed that back to the team and to those inspectors involved in that inspection as well. So that does happen, and that has been happening quite a few times recently as well.
Graham.
Yes, I think it's a very welcome development, and I thought even if it's a small sample, I thought the overall response was a positive one, and I think you can take comfort from that. I mean, I'd echo Steve's point about the PR and the wider team, but I'd be very surprised if it's the PRs who are responding that you don't get more kickbacks. You know, when I think of some of the inspection reports I've read at Licence Committee which actually criticised the PR. They're not going to necessarily strongly agree with the criticism of them, but they may well respond positively. But that led me to wonder, when this SurveyMonkey survey is filled in, because you might get a different response after the oral feedback at the end of the inspection from what's received as the response when the written inspection comes, because people tend, if I've understood, I mean, I know of cases where people have said, well, they felt very positive at the end of the inspection, but when they read the inspection report, it didn't seem so positive because, of course, people edit out some of the criticisms that they hear. So can you identify when the SurveyMonkey response is sent in relation to when the inspection report is received? Because I think that will tell you quite a lot.
I think to answer that, Graham, the survey is sent out as soon as the inspection is finished. So as soon as that inspection has concluded, business support know that and they send the survey out straight away.
Alison.
Thank you. I was going to ask the question as well about the oral and written, because you can get different feedback, I'm sure. That would be interesting to know. But one question I did have was that 75% of the respondents agreed with the findings within the inspection report were accurate and clearly presented, which means that 1 in 4 found it not accurate or not well presented. And that's a little bit worrying. So I just wonder if you had any more information around about that issue.
No, unless, you know, the narratives that we get back, the free text comments don't indicate anything. Those PRs that we have met with recently who wanted to provide specific feedback, that may well be those numbers. And we are aware of that feedback.
Alex and then Ross.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with Catherine and others about the response rate, and one of the reasons I wonder if it was relatively low is just because I know there are lots and lots of avenues for people to feedback to HFEA. You know, Peter and Gina, I know you get feedback all the time through formal forums and through visiting clinics and all the rest of it. And you know, I'm sure, Sharon, if someone has a particular problem with the self-assessment questionnaire, whatever it might be, they will pick up the phone to you and their inspector and say, here's my problem there and then. So it kind of leads me to, I suppose, 2.5 points, which is, number one, I wonder whether it should be anonymous. I don't think, you know, people would feel any fear of inspection prejudice if they give us, or anything like that. So I just wonder if either it's not anonymous or we give people that option. And then to Francis's point, we can see if that's just one clinic or not. I'm not sure in this situation, as it's, you know, professional relationship and anonymity helps. I suppose my second slightly controversial question is, well, let me make the other point first, which is, it would be good, I don't know, you know, want to be onerous, but it would be good to have all that informal feedback kind of documented and part of that analysis, because if that question is saying satisfied with the questionnaire, but all Peter hears on his rounds is how bad it is, there's a bit of triangulation here. And then my third kind of relatively controversial point is just in the spirit of, you know, stop, start, continue. I just wonder if this questionnaire adds to the fact we have lots and lots of continuous feedback through everything I've said, and, you know, not demeaning the excellent work that's gone in, but I just wonder, we can't do everything all the time, and perhaps we have a conversation about that.
Rosamond.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, Sharon, can you remind us the quantity of feedback was in relation to the number of inspections that occurred? And then, of course, this was just a time over a given time, wasn't it? And then, of course, the volume of clinics that would be inspected, of course, is much greater than, so this is not even a snapshot, is it, of the number of clinics per se, if you see what I mean? Sorry, that question's not very clear, but yeah.
Yes, it was over
It was over that time period for a year. So there was 88 inspections for that year, with 24 clinics responded back. So, and there are a total of 26 questions in the survey.
Sorry, and then the total number.
Hang on, Sharon, turn your.
So, and the total number of clinics in the UK, just to remind us that you would inspect more generally, roughly. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Approximately 120, 110. But we also send the survey out to research centres as well.
Thanks, everybody. Any other, Rachel?
I agree. There's lots of different multiple ways of communicating with the HFEA, and I think that's very good that PRs and clinic staff feel able to approach myself, Peter, Julia, their inspectors. But I do think it is good to have a formal route that we can analyse properly, and I am encouraged with the increase in numbers that we've had. So, you know, I think next year will give us a bigger picture and help us to reflect on the inspection process. It will also help us to quantify the Phoenix project about how the improvements to the IT, because hopefully those comments we get about IT glitches and not being able to work the SAQ will help us look and reflect on those improvements as well. We do have to remember we are a regulator and we are there, you know, we do find non-compliances and we do work to improve clinics, and sometimes they might not always be welcome, but we are there as a regulator to do that. But I think we do have an open relationship with the sector and do help and support them get through those as well, especially in following up them.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Sharon and Anne-Harrod. I think, I mean, from my point, I agree. I think that I can see the reasons perhaps for it, but it was a disappointingly small sample. But Rachel, I think you're encouraged that the numbers are increasing. I think we need to keep a sort of close eye, because if the sample is, you know, not significantly increased by next year, then I think there is something to sort of worry about, because as Peter just said only an hour or so ago, you know, people fill in surveys if they think that something will change or that they'll be listened to or they'll be useful, and they don't if they don't. So that of itself is telling us something that we should at least be mindful of, I think. The only, and Catherine, I'll come back to it. The only thing I would say is, because obviously this is very important, whether, and I don't want to burden either Sharon or the members, but it feels like why wouldn't it be circulated? I mean, I think we should just, you know, Rachel said you're happy to discuss it. Let's not, we don't need to bother you to discuss it. Let's just circulate the survey plus the free text, and then we can look at it. And then if anybody's got any questions or worries, they can then speak to Rachel or Sharon specifically. Would that be helpful? And then that would be a good thing. Catherine, you wanted to.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you very much for suggesting that. I'm entirely in agreement. Just picking up your point about whether people feel there is a point in filling out a survey, which obviously takes some time. I'm absolutely with you there. And one very common and easy way to persuade stakeholders that note will be taken is the "you said, we did."
Yeah.
Perhaps 3 months after the submission and the collation of all the feedback, so that there is a regular dialogue and method for all clinics to be able to see exactly what we did with their feedback, what we changed, how it will impact on their SAQ next time round, or their experience of the inspection next time round. Because I think people can feel quite skeptical about bodies saying, yes, we really value feedback and we will take it on board, and then not saying in what way they take it on board and what changes as a result.
I think that's something to think about. I'm just also, I suppose we should also have in mind what Rachel said, which is, I think, is that, you know, we are a regulator and that we are going to sometimes highlight non-compliance or say things that clinics don't like. And they're never gonna like that. So I think that, you know, there is an element of that we obviously mustn't forget. Yeah, Rachel.
So yes, we can summarise like in a PowerPoint like that we've just done with the extra questions slotted in. That's not a problem, and send that round. And I think I agree, Catherine. I think where we have made a change and where we have considered something, we could do like just a clinic focus article to say what we've done. That's especially important with the Phoenix project, because not everybody in the sector will know that we're doing that and when that will be live and the improvements made. So we can do something, certainly.
Great. So thanks very much, Anne, Howard and Sharon. And now we move to the last substantive item, which is really interesting. We're asking Molly to come and talk about the regulation of AI in fertility treatment. Hi, Molly. It's funny enough, this was the subject of my provocation to some extent at the Nuffield Council last week. It's something that we are, you know, grappling with more and more, and it's very important as the use of AI technologies increase in the fertility sector. So Molly, over to you.
Thank you, Julia. So yeah, we're bringing this item to the authority for discussion as laid out in Objective 6 of the HFEA's current strategy. We've outlined our commitment to preparing for the ways in which innovative technologies are likely to impact on the sector in order to ensure that patients and clinic staff feel confident in the use of AI tools that are deployed and that regulation keeps pace with innovation. So the authority has been monitoring research and clinical developments in AI through the Scientific and Clinical Advances Advisory Committee since February 2019. And the executive have also carried out a scoping project aiming to improve our understanding of how AI and other emerging technologies, such as robotics and automation, are being used within the sector and map the UK's regulatory landscape. So the associated paper for this item summarises most of the findings of that work, and I'll just highlight some of the key takeaways. So firstly, it's appropriate to frame this item in context against kind of the UK's broader approach to AI regulation. So the government has adopted a pro-innovation approach, which rather than establishing a single regulatory framework, statutory framework, relies on the existing regulators to apply the 5 high-level principles to the adoption of AI. So those are listed on the slide. Within the healthcare sector, this model is reflected in this kind of shared regulatory oversight of AI adoption, which depends on the technology's intended purpose, data use, and the clinical context in which the tool is applied. So where it all intersects with the statutory remit of a regulatory body, the appropriate authority will assess its compliance with the applicable legislation and regulatory requirements, which means that different regulators might engage with the regulation of the AI tool during the course of its life cycle. So, for example, where the AI tool, if an AI tool is used for clinical decision support, it will likely be classified as a medical device and then subject to compliance with the medical device regulations that are enforced by the MHRA. So kind of to coordinate oversight and explore how AI technologies can be adopted within the existing regulatory framework, some of the other regulators, such as the ICO and the MHRA, have kind of introduced specific initiatives to consider AI. So these include like the AI and Digital Regulation Service or regulatory sandboxes, such as the MHRA's AI airlock. Through our horizon scanning function and work with the SCAC, we've identified a number of current and potential areas throughout the patient pathway where AI tools could be integrated. So this diagram kind of highlights a few examples of these, including areas where we anticipate the uses will expand, which we'll continue to monitor through our horizon scanning work. Some key examples of the current uses include the embryo evaluation and ranking tools, which are often integrated into time-lapse imaging, which is actually rated as an add-on. And within the paper, we've highlighted some of the key benefits and risks that these technologies may pose, but it's pertinent to highlight that the development of these tools within the fertility sector is occurring both through commercial providers and in-house initiatives. So as a sector-specific regulator, the HFEA is responsible for monitoring how AI technologies are being adopted in practice. And we do this by ensuring that licensed centres who are using the AI-assisted tools are able to demonstrate that they are meeting the required standards and that the technology is being deployed in a way that's compliant with the acts under which we regulate and our associated guidance. So this includes ensuring that licensed centres can provide evidence of, for example, risk assessments, validation, and compliance with the standards of other regulators, such as being able to evidence the appropriate CE or UK CA markings for a medical device. So our existing regulatory tools, including the Code of Practice and licence conditions, provide a framework through which the responsible adoption of AI and kind of any other emerging technology can be overseen. And these tools allow us to review the use of a tool and raise a non-compliance if centres are unable to evidence appropriate adoption or governance. However, I wanted to highlight that this guidance is not specific to the use of AI and is limited to the statutory framework under which the HFEA has oversight, which results in an element of kind of interdependence with the position of other regulatory bodies. For example, the CE or UK CA markings are set by the MHRA, who are currently reviewing the classification rules through the change programme, their medical device change programme. So in line with the current guidance, our expectations of clinics should provide some assurance that we're able to oversee the use of AI tools in practice. However, regardless of any kind of movement within the regulatory framework, healthcare practitioners do remain ultimately responsible for the safe and effective use of any innovative tool deployed. Now, for our ongoing work and next steps, the executive plan to continue to track new and emerging uses of AI in the fertility sector, which will next be discussed at the February SCAC meeting, and will continue to monitor the deployment of AI tools during inspections. There's specific information on our clinic portal on AI, which states our current regulatory position and signpost licensed centres to relevant guidance produced by other regulators, and we'll continue to update that page as needed. We'll also continue to engage with the MHRA and other oversight bodies, as well as our stakeholder groups, to monitor changes in regulation and escalate our concerns. And depending on the direction given by the authority, we may consider developing further patient information or clinic guidance, which could include formally extending the principles of responsible innovation to AI, which were developed for the add-ons, or assessing whether AI users are introducing new processes that might fall outside of the current authorised process list. So in relation to this item, we're asking the authority to kind of discuss the identified uses of AI technology within the fertility sector and our regulatory position as we set out in the paper. And then the authority is asked to consider whether we should take any further steps to develop our regulatory stance now or respond in the future as and when needed. And that could include developing further patient information or sector guidance, stakeholder engagement, or more work on our regulatory expectations.
Molly, thank you very much. That was a very clear presentation. Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. As ever, it was really clear presentation and also very good paper there as well. So thank you. Yes, we discussed this at SCAC a number of times, and I sort of feel as though we're standing on the brink at the moment, about to jump or be pushed, whichever way you look at it, with AI. Because I mean, AI is really widely used within clinics, but very much within the incubator setting. So the time lapse stuff. And probably the majority of UK clinics now would have some sort of time lapse thing somewhere in there for the embryo. And then these algorithms and the AI and machine learning or whatever are used very widely. And as Molly mentioned, we have reviewed that as an add-on, and there's some really high quality data showing no benefit of AI in terms of embryo selection, increasing the live birth rate. So that's why we rated it black on the add-ons system. But as Molly touched on in the presentation and in the paper, there's going to be touch points for AI from way before a patient even gets anywhere near the clinic to way after she and he have left left the clinic as well, all the way through. At the moment, it's not really happening. And probably if you asked most, again, I don't know, inspections were mentioned. I don't know. I mean, do you routinely ask what AI is being used during inspections? Because obviously there is a regulatory environment there already in terms of MHRA, and these are medical devices if they're being used for patient points. There's AI that's being used in the ambient software. So most clinics now many clinics will be monitoring with patient consent the consultation, and then the letter is automatically printed up afterwards, which is amazing because people spend 10 minutes dictating. Now it's just done like that. That's all AI. So it's all about to come in. And the confusing thing at the moment, as Molly pointed out, is that no one really knows where the regulations all fit in. And it's all going to be happening soon. So I think my view is going to be very difficult for us to take a really clear stance on this because it's all in process at the moment, but it's coming so soon. And month on month, there's just more things that, as a doctor, I'm being bombarded, use this from an AI perspective clinically. So just to sum all of that up, I feel we should be working now on trying to get some sort of stance on it, but we're going to have to be waiting also for what departments and other regulators, their views as well.
Claire's going to come in on this particular point, and then we'll go to Anya.
I just wondered if it's worth putting that diagram back up, which is on page 60, the last page of the papers, that's got all the use of AI, and just kind of getting a sense check from members about whether are there concerns, kind of issues, back of your mind, worries about all of those aspects, or are there particular aspects of that? I'm just, I think it's the next one, Shabir, if you could keep going.
The graphic right there.
Are there particular aspects that you think, as the HFEA, that's on page 68 of your papers, if you can see it there, are there particular aspects of that you're worried about, or is this something that, you want SCAC to sort of pick up on more directly? I think that would be helpful from a policy perspective to sort of see where the authority is on this.
So I'm going to hold that thought for a second and go to some of the questions, come back to it. Anya.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful paper. Obviously, AI, there's some factors that run across the board, but I do think we need to be very mindful of them in terms of the fertility sector. And one is mentioned in 3.3, which is the data bias, which is going to be a problem across the board. But because of the fertility sector already having bias embedded in it in terms of outcomes for global majority, etc., I think it's really worth us being very mindful with use of AI going forward on that count. But the other thing is thinking in terms of neurodiversity. So thinking in terms of number 6, to your point, Claire, in terms of patient communication, just being very mindful. In some ways, AI is going to be actually a very helpful tool with neurodiversity in another format of receiving information, but it's just to be aware of certain aspects of neurodiversity, such as dyslexia, etc., going forward with patient comms. So it's just to say, even at this stage, when we're thinking about points 1 to 6, I think inherent bias and neurodiversity would be 2 areas I'd really want to highlight and focus in on.
Francis.
So we talk about AI as with everything sitting in one bucket, but I think it has many different uses, and we may find that we need to tease them out into different ways. And it may be that AI will eventually be able to learn how to distinguish embryos that have greater potential than others, although we know it doesn't do that yet. I've come across 2 uses of AI recently relating to fertility where it got the answer completely wrong. I can't remember the question I asked, but it generated a statement to say that cystic fibrosis was autosomal dominant. Well, it isn't. It's recessive. That was simply wrong. And the second thing is, I think I mentioned this at our last meeting. We initially tried using AI to separate out the 1900 conditions that are licensed for PGTM into were they predominantly neurological, nephrological, or whatever, just so that we knew which type of specialist to ask about new treatments for those conditions. And it got somewhere between a third and a quarter of them wrong. It just put them in the wrong category. And I could sort of see what had happened. It was obviously scanning the literature. And if there'd been a recent publication about a condition that primarily affects the brain, but the publication was about some rare side effect that had affected a different organ, it then put that disease in that bucket. So I could understand why it had got it wrong, but I wonder whether one of the things we should start doing from a very early stage is asking people to alert us when AI gets it wrong, so that we can try and understand why, and also warn other people that this might be a particular fallibility.
Steve, and then
Thank you. I have a question and a couple of comments, if I may. Firstly, you've described, thank you, in the paper about the various different agencies that will be involved in regulating this, and the fact that we'll need to sort out what the HFEA does. One thing I didn't see mentioned was advertising, and of course, forgive me if I missed it, but when new technology comes out, and we see this already, there are claims made for that new technology which are sometimes very difficult to justify. So my question is, how will, I don't know, the Advertising Standards Agency fit into all this? And then secondly, there's mention in the paper around the fact that AI might be like an add-on, and I'm not sure that's right, because as we define an add-on at the moment, they are things which are added on to routine treatment. Then I can see AI becoming very rapidly a routine part of treatment. And my third comment is, I think we need to be doing something now. Where it's already here. Thank you.
Molly, do you want to respond a bit?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, yeah, I think at 5.7, when the SCAC last discussed kind of if it was possible to rate AI as an add-on, it was felt that it was kind of dependent on whether there was the patient choice and cost involved. So that's why kind of the ones involved in the time lapse were rated, but there was still kind of a question mark around whether it would be applicable to be able to blanket rate them.
Thank you for the paper, Molly, and really clear and really good. In answer to the question, three suggestions from me, and very happy to help with any of these three if we take any forward. So the first one is, I think we should put out some guidance as quickly as possible, and I'm not sure clinics are necessarily, excuse the pun, the most intelligent purchasers of AI, and there being, things thrown at them on all sides. And I think, through Clinic Focus or something, we should put out some guidance, just giving them some best practice on purchasing AI and a bit of myth busting. So, for example, there's you can be a class 1 medical device or a class 2 medical device at the MHRA. Class 1 is cheaper and easier to get, whereas really you should only really buy if it's class 2. So just explaining things like that, data governance, they should ask all suppliers, are you using any data to train the model, as you've talked to, and so we could just give some top tips to kind of help with purchasing. And as part of that, the NHS has some very good standards for both buyers and suppliers. So if you're a supplier, you're supposed to adhere to something called DCB 0129. I didn't come up with those names. And if you're a buyer, you're supposed to adhere to something called DCB 0160. And there was a paper published last week, I think, in the BMJ, but I can dig it out, which actually said 70% of people don't. But it might be, we suggest to clinics they should ask for that DCB 0129, even though it's not mandated, and they should adhere to that DCB 0160 or parts of it. So I think that's kind of suggestion 1 and fairly easy and quick to do. I think suggestion 2, building on what Francis said, AI, it's everything and it's nothing. And I think probably we wouldn't bring a paper to the authority to say, should clinics be using computers or something like that? So I think probably in the future, we shouldn't have these general conversations. And to Claire's point, I think we should segment that pathway and see which bits we're interested in from a regulatory point of view. But I think we should also call out different methods of AI and say, this is what we're concerned about. So for example, if a clinic books patients on the hour every hour, and uses a bit of AI to read the notes and say, I think this one's going to take 1 hour, 15 minutes, and I think this one's going to take 45 minutes. We're probably not too concerned. We're not probably too concerned about that. I think, it's probably quite intelligent to do, but I don't know whether we're concerned about AI writing the letters or not, in the same way, I don't know if we were concerned when clinics stopped posting things and moved to email, etc. However, we are concerned about agentic AI algorithms picking embryos to implant. So I would take that and, say, this is the AI technique we're concerned about. This is it. The rest of it kind of, that's not where our priorities are. And then my third point is, you said we have had some engagement with the MHRA, and it'd be good out of session to understand that. But I think this new commission, which is co-chaired by the Patient Safety Commissioner, who I think Julia does meet with now and then, I remember it's been in the papers, I think we should probably write to them formally, kind of pointing out some of the risks in fertility as a sector, which Tim articulated, and just make sure it's on their radar and kind of have an open dialogue with them.
Rosamund.
Thanks, Julia. So yes, excellent paper, Molly, extremely clear in every way, very, very thorough. Yes, just a few comments in no order, really. So firstly, I suppose fully appreciate this is an interregulatory issue, etc., and lots being discussed about the MHRA and the change program, etc., and all of that. So in terms of the HFEA, though, I agree. I think this is all about to happen, and it is happening. And I think it is better to jump in and do something now and say something now. What that is exactly as regards clinics is something, of course, to work out, SCAC and everything, etc. But I think I know there's a reference already to the clinic portal and various bits of information being available there. I haven't seen that myself, so I don't know what's already there. So that could be reviewed. I'm also thinking, and it's reflected in, I think, section 6 of the paper very helpfully, about patient information and how SCAC had done a survey, I think it is, isn't it? And patients had commented, I think it was February 24 or something. Yeah, so I think it's really important that the HFEA has something on its website about for patients about use of AI in fertility and what the regulator isn't doing, isn't doing, etc. But the fact that this is a fast-moving area, etc., etc. As regards this very helpful chart, obviously all the bits that happen in clinics are very much for bodies like SCAC to assess and others, etc. I do have a comment to make about generative AI for patient education and engagement. And Claire, you asked, which bits are we concerned about? So I only feel qualified really to comment on that. And I am concerned about that because of the issues with errors in generative AI. And because it's also related to that question of where people get their information. And we talked before about possible dips in website use because people are just finding stuff popping up on Google Copilot, whatever they think, the stuff that comes up on your phone as well, etc. So I think that is a really important issue because of, we want people to be getting their information from truly authoritative sources, given the error rate and so forth in generative AI that we're all familiar with, etc. Yeah, thank you.
Catherine and then Geeta.
Thank you, Julia. Great paper, Molly. Thank you. Just a few points. Firstly, I'm completely with Steve. I think we've got to show some thought leadership here. Of course, it's important to continue working closely with other co-regulators, but I think for our sector, we need to show some leadership. And building on both what Alex and Rosamund have said, in so doing, I absolutely agree that we need to move quickly on information and links about the use of AI in the fertility pathway on our website, in social media. Need to think already that the minute we've posted it, we will need continually to refresh it. And I probably wouldn't suggest limiting what we do with the sector to a clinic focus. It seems to me that this is the perfect topic for a PR event. Because in a PR event, we could go back to fundamentals. We could go back to their fundamental requirement as license holders to provide accurate and unbiased information. We could go back to the 5 high-level principles. We could cover off fallibility, key points of risk in the patient pathway, top tips, NHS standards, particular recommendations. And I think it would be a very, I think it would be a real statement of sector leadership, but I also think that it would be a really valuable melting pot for examples of perhaps ill-considered adoption and best practice to be shared face-to-face between our PR holders. So I would advocate that. And the last point that I make, again, just referring to the particular points of risk in this diagram, is that I know that already Peter and the team are thinking about this, but I do think sooner rather than later, we need to consider a risk being added to our strategic risk register, not just around the risks of AI within current fertility treatment, but rather the risks if we as the regulator do not keep up with either developments in or appetite for further development, either within the sector or within government, not just in terms of our reputation, which is of less importance, but in terms of to what degree everyone, the sector and patients, have confidence in us as the national regulator.
Gita. Thank you, Julia. Molly, thank you for an excellent paper, much needed and timely and relevant. And thanks to our colleagues for an excellent discussion as well. Where do I start? I was looking at, I haven't really gone into the details, hyperlinked 5 high-level principles. I'm sure they will be discussed when the AI bill comes. But I think when it comes to clinical medicine, we need to go beyond these principles because I don't think they cover everything when it comes to clinical medicine. They are okay for technology field, but it covers safety, but there's a lot more here about outcomes, cost, peer-reviewed papers, and all sorts of things that I'm sure the government will address at the right time, and the nice guidelines as well need to, because some of the bits that you have said in your patient pathway, particularly the light blue ones, where that takes place inside a licensed clinic or the third party with a licensed clinic. Tim articulated about the time lapse. I agree with that. But I agree with Steve about advertising, as well as it's not an add-on, particularly when you're looking at clinical treatment. It's already being used by some clinics for fertility MOTs. In patient clinical pathways, I'm not talking about the laboratory. And you have actually listed everything: stimulation monitoring, trigger timing. There is hardly any peer-reviewed paper when it comes to these things. There's one published by Imperial in January this year, which was actually supported by NIHR, about the size of the follicles for trigger, which is, I'm delighted about it, because if that research continues, we're probably going to reduce OHSS further. But I think until such a time that there are peer-reviewed papers, we should be really keeping an eye on how it is being actually offered to patients currently when it comes to monitoring, diagnostics, as well as until trigger time. So I think we should do it now, and it's not an add-on. It definitely isn't an add-on. It cuts across the entire patient pathway. There's additional cost involved. Some of the 5 principles includes fairness, safety. Taking those into account, I think we have an obligation to do something about it now.
Thank you. There's just one other point that I wanted to mention, really to put to Sharon, regarding how we propose now to upskill our inspectors. if they have responsibility for inspecting evidence of compliance with standards of the MHRA, how and when do we plan to upskill them on recognising inappropriate or unsafe deployment? And similarly, how can we use the intelligence from our inspectors to alert us to additional points of risk in the patient pathway, because it's very much their on the ground experience that might bring matters to our attention sooner rather than later.
Thank you. And this is really tricky because a lot of the AI medical devices are very complex. There's a lot of complex algorithms. I think we have tools already within our inspection processes where we are looking to ensure that any systems that are brought into the clinic are appropriately validated and that the PR has taken that responsibility, that staff are trained, staff are competent. Again, we have come across one area recently whereby one of my inspectors noticed this was being used and that they clarified the validation, and it was raised as part of the inspection process. So this will be ongoing, but we do have tools which we can currently use to ensure safe practices. We do at the moment expect all clinics to use Class 2A in a clinic for CE mark product if it's being used in the clinic. But as I say, we will be looking, we can check what's being used in the clinic as part of the DBO process. We can update our notebooks to ask that question: what are you using? What new processes are you using? What new equipment? Has it been validated? Have staff been trained? Are staff competent? Are patients being notified of this? Is it in patient information leaflets? So there are things that we can currently do, which we do already, and we apply that principle to other processes. So there are things, but again, this is very tricky and complicated areas. And if we were to be checking algorithms, which my inspectors are not experts, that would be, we need to be mindful of that. But there are things that we can do that we do currently do already regarding validation, training, patient information.
Alex.
Sorry, I was just going to come back on that minor point. I don't think we would expect the inspectors to check algorithms. I think we would expect the clinic to buy products that have the MHRA Class 2 regulation, so then the algorithm has been checked and that's public, but they're checking, if you see what I mean. But sorry, it's a very small point.
Well, you're coming back on this.
Thank you, Sharon and Alex. Yeah, that is assuring, but it does. It's predicated on a really quite high level, much higher than I have, of AI literacy amongst our inspectors as a whole. So I suppose what I'd want to be assured about is how we're going to first check that there is that base level amongst all our inspectors, and how we're going to continually lift that up as the technologies develop. Because I do think that that's going to be relevant to the questions that they can ask and should ask.
Thank you. It's a really interesting discussion, and as others have said, a really interesting paper. And I think the really key point is the point about prioritisation, because there's so much that we could do in this particular area in different bits. And there is a question about where our efforts would best sit and where our concerns are greatest, but also where we could have most impact. So I personally think, in terms of the prioritisation question, there is a bit about the MHRA and the procurement of appropriate equipment that is CE marked and validated, that also applies the ICO commissioner advice, so that people understand how their data is being used. And there are a lot of people who are grappling with this. There is actually a lot of advice out there.
but I think it's also really difficult to get to grips with it unless you have the support and help to do that. So I do feel that one of the things that we need to prioritise is actually helping the clinics and our own inspectors getting to grips with those aspects. I know from my own background that there are questions sort of in things like patient communication about when AI becomes a medical device or not, and it depends on the content of what is being talked about. But I'd suggest again, in terms of prioritization, we're probably more worried if it falls into the medical device space of the type of advice than we would be other aspects of that. That's not to say that other aspects aren't still sort of worrying, but if it was at the stage where it was or could be classified as a medical device, but it's not, that's a real concern for us. So in terms of the prioritization, I would think in that particular space, but I do recognise that the problem there is that there are areas around the edges of this which everyone is grappling with, which we're not entirely sure of. So we shouldn't lose sight of that as well.
Let me. Oh, Rachel.
I think we need to obviously be on top of what's happening with the MHRA and learn. Sharon has regular meetings with them so we can work through training and recognising what's a medical device and the classifications for different things. In the same way that we do for any device that's used in a clinic now, we do have a licence condition that says that a plastic dish or a device has to be this, and the inspectors would check that all those devices that are used in a laboratory are marked accordingly and approved to use. And if they're not, they expect to see the rationale and validation behind that. So I think there is ongoing training to do. There is a lot more learning to do with the MHRA to see where the regulations go, and then work through our inspector's notebook to see how we can pick that out. But it would be just evolving what we do, as Sharon said, checking that validation is done appropriately, patient information is there, the staff are competent and trained how to use things so that we know that it's being used in a safe environment. And of course, if it wasn't, those things that we have license conditions for at the moment, it could be brought through that. But ultimately, we can't be there to judge, as Tom says and Alex says, we're not there to judge how the algorithm works or whether it is actually effective, because that would be the MHRA's responsibility.
And I think Alex's idea of something going out to the sector will be really helpful. I think that will help us formulate our thoughts on this as well. And I think the clinical, I'm very happy to get involved, obviously, because we've been looking at this in SCAC with myself, Alex, and the exec team to help put something together on that, and also to use that really helpful diagram there, because that also, there was a Nature paper from last year that I think that might have been taken from roughly, because it's sort of got the same stages, but it's also got all of the studies that have been looked at all those different stages there. So it's a really good start by Hannah Sab, I think, really good starting point, because then we can actually look to see, well, which bits are we more likely to be concerned about, which bits, as you mentioned, the ambient software for clinic letters, less concerned about that from our perspective. That might be a good starting point as well.
Yeah, I agree with Tim and others about looking at patient information and all that, but I'm not talking here about some advanced machine or technology in the laboratory. I'm talking about simple ultrasound machine that is used day to day for monitoring and trying to use some algorithm to try and say, when should we trigger your egg collection? So it's not necessarily going to the MHRA or some equipment that we should be looking at. I'm looking at day-to-day pathway where it is being used. It could be used. I think in diagnostics it's being used at the moment without solid peer-reviewed evidence. That is the bit which is why we need to look at the patient information and what is given to patients, because this is used in their day-to-day management.
So let me try and bring this a little bit together. I think the answer to the question, Molly, is sort of possibly. No, I'm joking. I mean, look, the answer to the question you asked is, I think, yes, we need to be considering this right now and not not wait, broadly, because there are areas where we might need to wait a bit, but this needs to be within our purview right now. I think this chart that we'll take here is very helpful in deciding where responsibility lies, because in some sense you've got some areas which are very much in the clinical pathway, which I think really needs to stay with SCAC because that's the right place for it. There may be other areas which actually fall into comms, actually, because that's the right place for it. And then there's a whole piece around what the inspectors need to think about and in inspection. So it's not like a sort of one size fits all. This is complex. We also have to decide what work we're going to do, within the sort of against the backdrop of our priorities for 2026, cost, resource. There's it's complex, and I think that lots of people have been taking notes. You too. I think there's a lot there to unpick. What I'm hoping is that we now hand over this whole discussion to you, bearing in mind what everyone said, to come up with, I think, a sort of plan together with the exec about, where within our priorities and so on, what work needs to be done where. Because particularly, for example, on the clinical pathway that stays with SCAC, there will be some things you want to look at right now, but there are other things that if you leave them a year or two, it won't matter. And I'm sure that's the same in all these areas. Some are more urgent than others. So I think if you're happy, we've sort of given you a bit of a steer about what we think is important and where our priorities lie. And hopefully that will provide a backdrop for another piece of work. Does that sort of sound sensible to everybody? Yeah? Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, actually. This is complicated, and I suspect this is something that will be coming back to us time and time again, because it's going to really affect every area of what we do, actually, in one way or another. So I think we now come, completely on time, actually, neither early nor late, to our last item, which is basically AOB. So I'm just going to go around the table to see if anybody has any AOB. Okay, well, I just firstly want to thank members very much. We've had our board effectiveness review yesterday, and we've had a sort of our away day, as it were, where we take a good look at ourselves. And I thank members very much for all their contributions, which I think have been really, really helpful. And obviously thank everybody else for the papers and for the meeting today. I know this is a little bit early, but actually just wishing everybody a very good winter holiday, and a sort of happy new year, because actually the next time we meet will be in 2026. So thank you very much for all your contributions for this year, and looking forward to an exciting next year. Thanks very much.